Okay, so here's how to solve number 1 of your do now. So you recognize that you need to isolate the absolute value, so we're simply going to subtract 7 from both sides. And so we have 3/4 absolute value of x plus 1 is greater than or equal to -6. Okay, so we want to get rid of this fraction, and so we're going to multiply by 4, and then we'll be left with the 3. So if we multiply this whole thing by 4/3, recognize over here if we multiply that by 4/3, the 4 divides out, the 3 divides out. So we'll do the same thing over here. So on the right side, so the 3 divides out with the -6, leaving us a -2. And so we end up with the absolute value of x plus 1 is greater than or equal to -8. Okay, so now we have the absolute value isolated, and you should recognize at this point that you can't go any further. There's no solution because you cannot have an absolute value having a negative answer. So this one finishes with no solution. Alright, so here's the solution to number 2. Notice we isolated the absolute value first by subtracting 3, then we had to divide by 4 on both sides. Once we got here, we could determine that we could go on because it's a positive number. Our two equations, 2x minus 1 is greater than 7, and because it's greater, we're going to get an or out of it, and then 2x minus 1 is less than or equal to -7. So remember, we take the inside out, reverse the sign, and reverse the sign of the number. Take the inside out, keep the sign and the number. So then when we solve, we get these for our answer. So now let's graph those. So here's the graph and the interval notation for that problem. So of course we have the -3, and we put that on our number line. It's a closed circle because it's equal to, and it's heading towards negatives because it's less than. X is greater than 4, so x is going to head to the right to positive infinity. And of course we use the parentheses for the negative and the positive infinity and the square brackets to say that those numbers are included. Alright, so number 3 is solved here. Notice that we, of course, had to isolate the inequality. So we have the -13, or subtraction of 13. And then at this point, you can't conclude yet that there's no solution because you haven't isolated it completely. Because once we divide by -2 on both sides, it causes us to get a positive over here. Remember, because we divided by a negative, we had to reverse the sign. So also note that this is an important step in this process. You must write this down because this is the point at which you decide if you're going to go further, because if it's a no solution, if this has a negative number over here, then it's no solution. You don't have to do anything. Also at this point, you can look at the inequality and decide, is this going to make an or an and statement? Since this is greater, this is going to make an or statement. And that just helps us to confirm when we're done what our graph should look like. And so then you need to write both of the equations down, or inequalities. So 4x plus 1 is greater than 4, so keeping everything the same. So take the inside out, keep the inequality the same, and keep the number the same. Then take the inside out, reverse the inequality, and reverse the sign of the number, and then solve. So these are your two answers, and in just a second we'll graph it. Okay, so here's the graph of it. I rewrote the numbers so that I could have the lowest number on the left-hand side so I could graph that piece. And I wrote the higher number on the right-hand side, and that's where I graphed that piece. So you'll notice that we had to take the number line and divide it into fourths. I'm going -1 and 1/4. so I need -1 and -2. Over here I'm going to 3/4, so I needed a 0 and a 1 and divided that into fourths. Interval notation, again, since it's an OR, we're going to union two different notations, negative infinity to -1 and 1/4, parentheses because it's not included. All right, thank you.